This call is now being recorded.
Good evening, Veena ji.
Chal.
All
Please
right.
start.
Okay. So I take this opportunity to welcome our guest speaker, Matthias, uh, uh, on the behalf of Department of Philosophy and a small initiative of SAMVAD. It's an informal group of students and teachers who are trying to invite speakers and thinkers from different fields and expose themselves to a world of ideas which can be, entertained and thought over time and again. And in continuation with the previous workshop on philosophical practice and philosophical counseling, we have our new guest speaker. I would be shortly requesting Yamini to introduce him formally. So we welcome you, sir, and with this hope that your deliberations will leave us with some message to ponder over, which will enrich us, which will help us to understand the nitty-gritties of this new upcoming field on philosophical counseling. We also hope that your deliberations will help us to understand not only the significance of this upcoming field, but also in some way how these basic fundamental philosophical questions uh, that normally we as students of philosophy handle it, and why philosophical counseling must be taken seriously. So with these words, I welcome you again to this platform, and I now request Yamini to introduce our honorable speaker, and then we'll proceed on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Now, I would like to say a few words about IPP and Matthias. Matthias has been a practitioner with Institute of Philosophical Practice for some time now, and he is from Sweden, and he is a school teacher, and he has a master's degree in philosophy, and I think he also has a degree in English literature. And for past 15 years, he has been teaching these subjects to high school students. Now, what I know, a few things about Matthias is that he has a very slow and firm way of speaking and conducting his workshops. And after we are proceeding from our last one with Oscar, and we saw that how philosophical practice works and what is the approach of Oscar and IPP, and then in Institute of Philosophical Practice. Now we move forward towards the competencies, and our today's workshop is an evolutionary step from that first workshop where we saw the approach. Now we move towards the introduction to competencies, the skills that are developed and used in philosophical practice, and we will mainly focus on problematization. And that is how the whole workshop is going to go on. And I would request you all to keep your cameras on and microphones off, and if there is any question, any query, you can put it on the chat. And I think that's it. If Akshat, you want to add anything, you can add, and then we'll proceed with the workshop.
I think we're good to go. We're going to discuss the specific competencies today. And as previously, we're not discussing the nature of philosophical practice or the nature of the whole philosophical counseling uh, uh, movement, So it's mostly about IPP and their methodology, and Matthias will take over from here. We'll discuss competencies, and I think we'll discuss problematization as a specific competency today. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Yes, indeed, we'll do a workshop today on problematization. So you get to see how it's usually done when we do it Before we get to the actual workshop, I would like to give a little short theoretical background into some of these different competencies that we work with, because they are very important philosophical tools that we use. And when we train people, when they come for individual training and so on, we usually start by training them in these different competencies. And then we also use them when we do consultations with people, when we do workshops and so on. So you could say it's a set of tools that we kind of base our work around in a methodological sense. So the first one I would like to say a few words about is argumentation, which is one of the main tools. So argumentation then, what is it? Well, when we give arguments, we consolidate the reasons for what we are saying. And the point here is that we avoid remaining in just opinion. You know? Because everyone has opinions, of course, but when we argue, we can put different positions against each other, so we can have in common, and we can see what separates them. And it's important here to distinguish between argumentation and rhetorics. So the philosophical argument is not, or at least ideally it's not, sometimes it is, but it used to be a contest to determine who is right. So it's not really about convincing people. It's rather about demonstrating that I have good reasons for what I'm saying, and to show that there's a logical connection between my different points of view. And there is nothing, of course, to stop me from accepting an argument, even if I disagree with the point of view, which is an important distinction. And Hegel also does it when he talks about immanent critique and transcendent critique, where the immanent critique is where you check the logic of the argument, you see that it holds together, you see that it holds water. But the transcendent critique is rather from the outside. It's where you don't like the idea, or you have a different value system, or you have different criteria. But it's important to be able to make this distinction, that you can accept an argument even if you don't like the idea. And very often we confuse these two. So to be able to do this, we must have the ability to detach ourselves from our own ideas. So that's something we work a lot with. People are usually fascinated with their own ideas. They are usually in love with their own ideas. Just like they marry their own ideas. But to be able to argue for an idea, or even against, or specifically against an idea, you have to be able to, see the idea as an idea in itself, and not something which is essentially you. So anyone who does not accept views other than their own, then you are stuck in some kind of religious or fundamental thinking. And then you renounce the ability to make any choices. And such a person is not willing to listen to arguments. So to be able to listen to arguments, you need to be able to think rationally. And we know with people who are very emotional, or people who are very dogmatic, often arguments, they don't work because they renounce this rational thinking. So argumentation, therefore, is one of the most important philosophical competencies that we use. It is necessary to be able to evaluate a situation or a statement, and to be able to make decisions on rational grounds. And now an argument, it is subjective, of course, because an argument, it takes a stand and it excludes other standpoints, but it only does so hypothetically. So the argument, it can always be abandoned for another argument, which is stronger or more convincing or more appealing. So the argument, it's never necessary. It's always uncertain. It's never definitive, because the opposite position can be just as plausible. So there is always a healthy measure of doubt when we give an argument. And this doubt is based on the fact that things could always be different. So things could be reversed at any time. So another argument can always hypothetically make me change my idea. So this work on argumentation, it is to train us to be able to detach ourselves from our own ideas and to think rationally about our ideas, our speech, our opinions, and so on. So that's what I wanted to say about argumentation. So if anyone has a question or comment or objection, whatever, just feel free to raise your hand. Otherwise, I'll go on.
No, it's okay. Can we just gather questions later on? If what kind of a methodology would you prefer, Matthias? A dialogical, or would you like to speak first and then gather questions and then respond to them?
Well, if anyone would like to ask a question right
All
now
right.
about argumentation, that's fine. Fine with me.
Okay. Okay. So
But
we
I'll
invite questions.
take after each competency. And then if anyone has a question, it's fine.
All right. So if anybody wishes to ask, please go ahead with regard to the concept of argumentation.
If you want to write, you can also write in the chat. I think we have a question.
Yes,
Ashpriya.
it was someone. Aishpriya. I think you raised your hand.
Ask your question, Ashpriya. Unmute yourself.
I'm audible now.
Yes, try it.
My question is, when you're talking about argumentation and you're saying that we must question our own idea, so it's like saying that we must argue with our what of our own thoughts, like.
Yes. And what do you think about that? Does it bother you, or you think it's a good idea?
That we must
Ashpriya, reframe your question once again, please.
Ashpriya, unmute yourself. You're on mute.
I think she's trying to type.
Yeah, it looks like she's typing.
All right. We can have another one. There's another question.
Let's just check with Aishpriya first. Is it a long question? You need to write a lot? Okay, maybe we'll let her write and we can move to the next questioner. So who was it?
I think it's Dr.
Hello, Jay.
Okay, it's
Jibin.
my
Jibin first.
Okay.
hello,
Dr.
sir.
Chibin.
Sir, my
Yeah,
doubt is,
I just
can
Let's
I?
go with
sure,
Chibin.
sure.
Okay.
We'll wait with Alok.
The doubt was, if dominance is prevalent, an argument is going on, and the opposing team or the argumentation, one specific group is dominant, how will be the conclusion? How can we conclude that argument at last? I don't know whether you are getting, sir. How will the argument go if dominance is more?
How will the argument go if dominance is?
Dominance. I mean, there is a dominant group there.
Yeah.
How can we make a conclusion out of that argument if a discussion is of that sort?
Yeah. Can you explain why it is a problem that there is a dominant group? Why would that make it difficult to make a conclusion?
Because they don't agree. They always consider they are right, and they don't want others' idea to be accepted.
And do you also consider that they are right because they are dominant, or not necessarily?
I mean, sir, it will be, if we think it in a justful way, there will be a right thing to be accepted. But this dominant group will be always away from this.
But now, Jibin, you're not answering my question. You know? You see? Let's say we have a dominant group, all right? But what about you yourself? Do you tend to agree with the dominant group or not necessarily?
If I feel that group is telling the right thing, I will agree.
And if you think they're telling the wrong thing, you agree with them or not?
No, I will not.
No? So then what does it matter if they're dominant or not? So it looks like you don't base your conclusion on the dominance of the group, right? You base it on something else. So what do you base your conclusion on when you decide whether to go along with an argument or not? And now you're muted. I cannot hear you.
It's now I understood, sir. It's all about our own concept you are concluding, how we perceive it.
Yeah. So what was the idea in your initial question? Why did it bother you that there is a dominant group?
Because in an argument, all sorts of group people will be there. There will be dominant people. There will be people who will not have any opinion. They will just be with whatever others say.
Yes. But then why would that bother you when you decide what to think about an argument?
It's up to me. It's what I decide.
It's up to you. It's what you decide, yes. But it looks to me like your initial idea was, how can we convince these dominant people that they are wrong if they are so dominant?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so that's what I sensed in your idea. But then you're still in this debate mode. You know? I have to convince people that my argument is the right argument. But then it's not about fighting. It's not about convincing other people that I'm right. It's about giving an argument and then check it out and see does it make sense or not. You know? And if these are dominant people, if they don't want to change their mind, okay, fine. But what's important here is that we work with the argument and we try to construct as good arguments as possible and we see if they make sense. And some people, okay, they're impossible to argue with for different reasons because they have strong convictions or because based on, I don't know, politics, religion, whatever, you know, and they refuse to give up their ideas, they refuse to give up their arguments. But then you can conclude that, okay, with these people, maybe I cannot work with them, I cannot convince them. Fine. But then fundamentally, the idea is that you yourself is able to evaluate an argument to see if it makes sense or not. And then you can enter into a dialogue with different people, and maybe you will realize that I cannot convince them. Okay, fine. But at least that doesn't change the fact that argumentation is a way, if you do it right, it's a way to, you know, train your rational thinking and make yourself detached from your own ideas. And then you need to decide these dominant people, are they really arguing rationally, or are they just, you know, promoting their own ideas, their own opinions in a very forceful way? Does it answer your question?
Yes, sir. It's clear.
Okay, good. Then let's go back to, before we go to Alok, Ashpriya. Are you finished with your question? I see it's in the chat, okay. So I will read it. We must argue about our own ideas, or it's just others' ideas that we must think of? Well, what do you think yourself? Do you have an hypothesis? Do we have to argue about our own ideas or only others' ideas?
It's like if I'm believing in something, then I must argue like why I'm believing in that thing. It's like that, or it's like if someone is believing in something, then I must think that okay, if he is in that position, what will I be thinking of that position with my own ideas or my own judgment?
Mhm. Yes. And what do you think makes more sense?
I don't know, maybe both of them. If I'm believing in something, I must have some reasons for believing in that,
Mhm.
or maybe. But there are some metaphysical things, like if I believe in God, then there is not much
Okay,
reasoning
but
about
for
it.
now, let's leave the metaphysical stuff outside. So if you believe in an idea, you say you must have a reasonable grounds for it, right? Yeah. Okay, what about the others' ideas?
They must also having a reason for believing in those.
Yeah.
So we must also seek their position onto that.
Yeah. Okay, so you don't have to make a choice between the two. You can combine them.
How so?
Yeah? Or you think you have to choose between them?
I don't know. So like
Well, do you think that you can give an argument for your own point of view and at the same time accept the argument of somebody else? Or is that impossible?
I can see what are the circumstances, or what are my reasoning to believe in something, and what is others person believing in something, because we may have different experience. What he experienced, it quite be different from me, and he have his own reasons and I might have my own. So we may be both right in our position.
Yeah? Okay. And you like this idea? Or not so much?
I think so.
Yeah?
Yeah, maybe.
Well, yeah, exactly. That's the internal critique, the immanent critique of it. You see, from his standpoint, does his argument make sense? And if they do, then fine, there's no problem. Then, of course, you don't have to like his ideas. You don't need to share the same values. But at the same time, you can see if his arguments make sense or not. Mm. So it's also a way of
Yes.
detaching yourself from your own ideas when you say, I must argue my own position. You don't have to necessarily, but still, you have your own position and someone else has another position. But then you're able to detach yourself from your own position and see that this position, it can also make sense from his standpoint. So that's the important detachment you do from yourself and your own ideas. So you don't have to choose my arguments or his arguments. You can have both. You can accept both.
Is it possible to accepting both of them? And if we are given a choice to choose, what will I'll be choosing would be based on my own experience. I can accept it until he's not with me, or he's in his own position. But
Yeah.
when it comes to me, would I be accepting his reasoning onto myself?
Well, there is a difference between accepting an argument and believing an argument or adopting an argument. You're okay with that distinction? You can accept an argument, you can see that it makes sense from a certain position, but it doesn't mean that you have to adopt it and make it yours. You can still have your position grounded on, your own beliefs, and you can make reasonable arguments for it. At the same time, you can accept someone else's arguments from his position. But accepting another's argument doesn't mean that you start believing like him necessarily. But I think that's the fear many people have. If I accept his arguments, maybe I will be conversed, I will be like him, and I don't want to. So therefore, I have to refuse his arguments. No. You can accept his arguments on rational grounds. You don't need to believe in them. But does it bother you to accept somebody else's arguments? Or at least it doesn't come easily to you.
Sometimes it doesn't come easily to me, but I try to understand them.
Yeah. Yes, fine. If you can understand it, if you can accept it as a reasonable argument, okay, then fine. Then you can have both. Doesn't mean that you have to change your own position, but you can accept his arguments as good arguments.
Okay.
Yeah? That answer your question?
Yes.
Okay, good. Let's see. Let's go to Alok. Now, you've been raising your hand for quite a while. There we
My
have you.
question is rather, there is a confusion. Confusion is that most of the time we argue from our own perspectives, our own ideologies, our own prejudices, and then the argumentation takes a form of quarrel. And it is not possible then to detach oneself from our own position. So the question of making a distinction between rhetoric and argumentation in actual practice is very difficult to practice, I think.
Yes.
One thing. And the second is
Let's
that
first go to the second thing. Let's just
related to this, that once we argue that
Alok.
God does not exist, then how can one person who believes that God does exist will accept my argument? This is the question.
Yeah, okay. So your first idea first. You said that it's very difficult, to go from rhetorics to argumentation. But you see, there's a difference between difficult and impossible. Yeah? Alok, can you turn on your microphone? Otherwise, I feel like
but in practice, difficult and impossible possibility is there, but that makes one has to be very, very idealistic type of a person. It requires a lot from a person.
Alok, I will interrupt you here. I will stop you here. Because otherwise, this is turning into a debate, just like the thing you said is very difficult to avoid. But what we try to do here is that we try to give our ideas as briefly, succinctly as possible, and then we try to have a discussion. We try not to force our ideas too strongly. So I'm going to listen to your first idea, and you said that switching from rhetorics to arguments, rhetorics to argumentation is difficult. But you also, before that, mentioned the word impossible. But you agree that something which is difficult is not necessarily impossible, right?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah.
So that it's difficult, okay, fine. In a certain context it is. But this is an ideal we try to strive for. And of course, as you say, in actual context, in actual content, yeah, maybe it's difficult. Maybe with some people it's even impossible. Okay, but that doesn't take away from the fact that this is what we try to do. This is what we work towards. So can you accept this difference between, okay, fine, in certain contexts it's not possible to do it maybe, but still it's an ideal that we adopt. You okay with that?
Okay.
Yeah?
If we can proceed this way, or it remains just an ideal,
yeah.
then it will be very difficult.
But it's not just an ideal. It's possible to do it. Not always, not with all people. But that's what we do in our training. That's what we do with people. We try to use arguments not as a debate, but as a way of thinking rationally about our own ideas. And I know if you go into politics, maybe it's not possible to do it because it follows certain rules and so on. But in our work, that's how we deal with argumentation. That's how we train ourselves to think. So yes, this is not transferable to all contexts, fine. But at least that's...
I had in my mind the everyday debate, political debates which are happening in our social media and media in general. There it seems that there is no end to argumentation and nothing comes out of it. So
exactly. And that's frustrating, right?
Yeah, that is very frustrating.
Indeed, yes. So that's what we try to avoid when we try to argue, not like a debate, but like more a philosophical argument where we give good grounds for our ideas. And we also listen to others' ideas. But yes, this is a different setting. This is not a political debate. And I don't think we should hope too much to change the political climate in any time soon, to introduce this type of argumentation. I think we will just remain frustrated, but at least see that, yes, we have rhetorics in certain circumstances, certain contexts, but what we try to do here is argue along other parameters. You okay with that?
Yeah, it may be easier in other contexts compared to politics. That seems somewhat plausible.
Okay, good. Now I see lots of people raise their hands, but I don't know, maybe I should continue. And maybe, Shivani, your first idea was a good one, that I continue, and then we see if we have other questions, because you never know. Sometimes people have no questions, sometimes people really like to talk. So maybe I'll just continue, and then we'll see if we have more questions before we go on to the workshop.
Sir, I have put 2 questions in the chat box, if you can respond to them.
I think we can take them later.
Okay, fine.
We'll take them later.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Yes, so I will go on.
So please continue. Yes. With the competencies.
Okay, good. So then I will say a few words about conceptualization, which is also something we do a lot, and which is probably the most difficult of the competencies, since it's very intellectual, it's very abstract, and it doesn't come natural to us. But to conceptualize then is to give a name to a phenomenon or a collection of properties. So, for an example, we could say vegetable. It's a term that includes a number of edible plants that share certain characteristics. But an individual vegetable, like a tomato, then would not usually be a concept. So it's kind of collective term for entities that share some characteristics. So conceptualization, why do we do it? Well, like Kant writes, it's just that thoughts without content are empty and intuitions without concepts are blind. So when you have an idea, you have a name, you have a label, you have a concept, but you don't fill it with any content, then it's hard to know what we're talking about. And we use these words, we use concepts like democracy and knowledge and sustainability, whatever. But if we don't put any content in them, we don't really know what we're talking about. And then you hear people arguing about democracy, or they say that we need democracy, we should protect democracy, whatever. But if you don't explain it, if you don't put any content in it, we don't really know what it is we're talking about. And at the same time, if we have intuitions, if we talk about things, but we don't label it, we don't conceptualize it, it's hard to see what it actually is that we're talking about. So the concept will give me a fixed point at which I can orientate myself. So for instance, I can look at myself, I can look at my actions, I can look at my behavior, I can look at the way I speak, and I can give it a quality, I can give it a label, I can give it a concept. Maybe I can see that what I'm doing is arrogant. It's not something pleasurable, it's not something I like, but if I don't conceptualize it, it makes it harder for me to see what it is I'm actually doing. Or if I'm greedy, or if I'm selfish, or if I'm generous, or whatever, when I put a name on it, when I conceptualize it, It helps me to see myself. It helps me to see my own behavior. So an intuition without concept is blind, as Kant says. But when we conceptualize, we focuses our gaze on something. It gives us something, a kind of polestar to orientate towards. So this conceptualization is very useful to synthesize a behavior, synthesize a person. In a general way, of course, if we say somebody is greedy, it's not an absolute idea. This person is only and always greedy. But still, it's a way to qualify a person. It's a way to see, their basic function. So conceptualization with ourselves and with ideas and so on. It's one of the main competencies that we use. Another one I'd like to mention is interpretation. So interpretation is something we do all the time. So we always interpret what we hear. And an interpretation is a paraphrasing, of course. So it's a way of saying what has already been said, but in other words. So an interpretation is subjective. And in a way, an interpretation is a form of betrayal. So the Italians have a nice term for this. They say traduttore traditore, or translator traitor. So an interpretation is never an exact copy of the initial statement. So with an interpretation, you always change a little bit, or you add something, you modify it a little. So it's never exactly the same as the original. So therefore, when you interpret what people are saying, sometimes they don't agree with you, but they say, oh, well, that's not what I said, because they feel betrayed, because they didn't honor their speech. But an interpretation is to see what is plausibly there in the speech. So with an interpretation, there are some pitfalls. One risk, of course, is that we overinterpret, is when we put too much emphasis in what is only a possibility among many possibilities. It's when we stretch an idea. We see that it might be like this, but maybe we have no real good grounds for thinking it. So then it's very easy to overinterpret someone's statements. And conversely, sometimes we are too careful. We don't really dare to add something of our own into it. And then we risk doing an underinterpretation, which is mainly that we just repeat what was already said. Or a third common mistake, where we misinterpret, willfully or not. We distract ourselves so much from the original statement that we almost lose contact with it. So it almost loses relevance. So we assume something that is not even possible, something that is so far from what was said that the interpretation then becomes irrelevant. So what a good interpretation needs to do is to try to find what is probable rather than what is just possible. And are these two terms, probable and possible, something we work with a lot? And we use them in a rather everyday sense. So when we say that something is probable, we mean that it's likely to happen. It's most likely the case that it is so. But when we say, well, that something is possible, then we say that, okay, it might happen. Not impossible, it could happen, but we don't really know whether it will happen or not. We don't know on the scale from 1 to 100 where it lies. So it's this ordinary, everyday sense we use these words. I worked with a Russian guy once, and he was very into formal logic, and he wanted to lecture me about the law of probability and everything. Well, okay, fine. But now, when we say probable, we mean that, okay, most likely it's going to happen. Like normal people use these words. Possible, okay, it's not impossible. Other than that, we don't know. So the interpretation, we try to make it probable. Then just a few words about questioning. Questioning, of course, it's what we do, very inspired by Socrates. And the questioning, it's of course paired with the ability to listen. So when you ask a question, you also need to be able to listen to the answer. And the answers we get from people, or questions, they reveal quite a lot about the people we're talking to. So their attitude to the world and their prejudices and the limit of their knowledge and so on. So then the answers we get from our questions inform us about the other person and guide us on how to proceed with new questions. And the goal, of course, is to make our counterparts start reflecting and making them think. Very often, the simplest questions are the most efficient ones. So for instance, the why question is often very efficient. Someone states something, someone asserts something, but a simple why question forces the person then to consider his own motives, to go to the foundation of an idea. If someone has an idea, I like this, I'm for this, I like democracy, whatever, or I'm a fascist, or whatever. Okay, but the why question, but why? Why do you think we should have democracy? Forces you to consider your own motives. And is especially efficient when it is an assertion that we take for granted. We say something that we don't really consider because for us it's so obvious, for us it's so natural. So we think that for other people as well, it has to be obvious. But this simple why question can be very efficient to make the person stop and think and consider their own motives, consider the grounds for their own ideas and opinions. So this why, this question, it causes you to be confronted with yourself and with your own motives. So be confronted with ourselves is always, or usually at least, a bit troubling. And this leads us into problematization, which is the theme of the day, because to problematize is, in a sense, to question. So when we problematize an idea, we put something into question. And these are two things that people usually don't like so much. People are not so fond of problems. We don't like problems. We want problems to go away. We want to solve problems. And we don't like to be questioned. Because when we are questioned, it feels like we are put on trial. We feel like we're being accused. So we work a lot with questioning people. That's what we do. And we work a lot with problematization. So we shouldn't be surprised if people don't like our work, if people get offended, if people get troubled by what we do, because we cause problems for them and we question what they say. But why we think it's important to problematize is that we believe that no statement, no proposition is absolute. So every proposition can be questioned. And it's like, I think it was Hegel who said that any statement can be problematized, including this one. So we take this as grounding, that all propositions can be problematized, they can be questioned. But there's a connection as well between problematization and free will and liberty. Because if you have no problematization, now what do you have? Then you have certitude. And when you only have certitude, when you have no incertitude, then you have no freedom, then you only have dogma. So to ask a real question is to free oneself from determination, from impositions that others put on us. So to problematize an idea is to escape the dogma. It's to assert your own individuality. I know it's what children do when they reach a certain age. They start to problematize, or they start to question their parents. Why do I have to do this? Why do I have to eat this? It's a way to manifest your own individuality and try to escape the conditioning of parents, the conditioning of schooling, the conditioning of society, the conditioning of religion, and so on. So to problematize ideas is a way to liberate yourself. But it's also dangerous, of course, because you go against the conditions of society, you go against the conditions of the powers. So it's a risky business. But we think it's a very important business, because it's necessary to think for yourself. So we have to kind of break free from this conditioning in order to be able to problematize. And we have to assert this liberty. And then when we problematize, we look for objections, and we look for questions which make it possible to show the limit of an idea or the limit of an initial proposition. When we problematize an idea, we can eliminate it if the problematization is really strong, or at least we can modify it, or we can enrich it, we can shake the foundations of it a little bit. So the problematization question, it tries to deconstruct, to break the foundation of a proposition. So to problematize is not just to negate, it's not just to say you are wrong, but it's to put an idea into question and see if it could be otherwise, if it could be in another kind of way. One way of doing this is, of course, to ask why, but it doesn't necessarily problematize, since the guy we're talking to, he might already have a prepared answer for our why question. But at least it's a way to start to problematize and ask, why is it like this and not the opposite? But one way of problematizing is to work with different conditions. I'll give you an example. For instance, somebody says human beings are free to do as... But then you can insert a condition and you can ask, are human beings always free to do as they wish? And with this always, you break the absolute nature of this original statement. Or you can ask, are human beings everywhere able to do as they wish? And then you can see that, well, this statement is not necessarily true. It is not so absolute as it looked like from the beginning. And another way, maybe a bit more tricky, but sometimes a bit more forceful, is to use concept, create concept, to introduce other concepts into the idea. So if somebody says human beings are free to do as they wish, I can introduce the concept of awareness. And I can say, am I necessarily aware of my desires? And then, if the answer is, well, I'm not always aware of my desires, it's quite possible that I have desires that I'm not aware of, then I have questioned the idea that I can do as I wish. Because I will, in a way, be driven by my desires. Or another concept I can introduce is conditioning. Can desires be the product of conditioning? And if I have certain desires which are the product of the conditioning of my parents, or my friends, or society, then I haven't chosen them myself. And then if I am conditioned to desire certain things, am I really free to do as I wish? Or a third concept I can introduce, the concept of will. And I can ask, does the will yield to desire? And I think we can accept that sometimes the will does yield to desire. Maybe I want something, intellectually maybe I want something, or I think it's reasonable maybe to not have another glass of wine, but my desire overtakes me, so I have this other glass of wine, and then maybe I regret it in the morning, I shouldn't have had it, and so on. So in that case, my desires overtook my will. So then I can also question, am I always free to do as I wish? Or are my desires sometimes too strong, and so they overtake my will? So all of this is a way to insert some instability, to break the foundations of this idea, to show that it's either wrong or that it's not always right, that it can be questioned. So this is the nature then of problematization, and that's the competency we're going to work with today. All right, so now after this theoretical background, before we go into the see if we have any pressing questions.
We do, I think, yeah.
We have one from Akshat.
Yes, sir. Thank you for your brief summary of the competencies. I had a question regarding interpretation. Does it necessarily involve some betrayal?
Wow. Usually when someone asks necessarily, the answer is no, because it is never necessary. There is always an exception. But let's see, can you think of an exception where an interpretation is not a betrayal? Do you have an idea?
Well, if I paraphrase what the other person says, maybe I use some synonyms and it's the same like structure. I use it in a different tone, perhaps, but the structure uh, and the words and the meanings, it remains the same.
Yeah. But you know, Plato said that synonyms never mean exactly the same. It's always a slight difference, even if it's just a difference in connotation. Maybe one has a slightly more positive connotation, the other a slightly more negative connotation. If you use synonyms, or as you said, if you change the tone, yeah, okay, fine. Maybe the content basically is the same, the form is the same. But then you change it with your synonyms, you might change the tone a little bit. And then maybe it sounds a little bit more negative or a little bit more positive than the intention was from the author. So then, of course, you can argue, am I betraying you? The author might say, yes, you're betraying me. Maybe a musician, he's playing a piece of music. The composer thinks, no, that's not the way I want it to sound. I'm following the sheet music, yeah, but oh, it's a bit too happy, too positive, or whatever. But then, of course, the author or the interpreter could argue that, well, no, I'm not betraying you. I'm revealing the truth in what you say, because this is what I saw. Okay, so it's hard to say definitely whether it's a betrayal or not, but I think the possibility of betrayal is always there.
And it's decided by the dialogue, by the subject.
Well, yeah. I don't think it can be definitely decided whether it's a betrayal or not. But, yeah. And I don't know if it's really interesting to decide whether it's a betrayal or not. But I think we should be aware of the possibility that an interpretation always risks being seen as a betrayal. When you interpret somebody, this person can always feel that he's being betrayed. I think the risk is always there.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you,
Okay.
Any other questions? We discussed 4-5 competencies in brief: argumentation, conceptualization, interpretation, problematization, questioning. Any questions you have regarding competencies in general or with any specific competency?
Yes, Ashpriya, you have a question.
So when you say that we are free because we problematize things, but I think it leads us to more determinism, because when I say why I'm like this, for example, why I am here, so there are some causes which lead me here. So it's like, it's not making us free, it's actually showing us the causes which for whatever incident in my life is having. And then you talked about desire and will. So
But
you say some you
yeah, Ashpriya, let's deal with it at a time, okay? Otherwise I lose track, otherwise it gets too much. So let me just clarify this why question. Of course, you can ask why, and you can get an explanation. And yes, indeed, why are we here on Earth? Fine, okay, the answer can lead to determination, but the why I'm talking about here is in relation to problematization, is when you use the why to make the person question the absolute nature of his idea. If somebody says God exists, and I can ask, well, why do you think that God necessarily exists? Well, of course, he can give you a fundamentalist answer, and he can give you an answer based on his religion, whatever. But at least the why question, it has a possibility to make him stop and think. And of course, a question doesn't necessarily problematize. And as I said, the why question as a problematization question is rather weak. It can work, but at the same time, the one you are asking it might already have a prepared answer to it. So yes, all of these questions, why is it like this? Can you explain this? Yes, there is a risk that they will just enforce the arguments they already have. So the why question, yes, it's not always problematizing. It depends on who you're talking to. It depends a bit on how it is used. So it's not risk-free to use it. Indeed.
So it's like I want to change myself. If I believe in something, I want to change it. So I think upon it. But as you talked about desire, sometimes desire is so strong that it doesn't, we cannot do what we want to do. So it's like saying we are free until we think. But when we apply it on real life, it is not that possible, to act that freely.
Well, you say it's not possible. But do you think it might be possible?
It depends on the conditions. Like if
Okay.
conditions make,
But that's a bit cheating to blame the conditions. But do you think it's possible, or do you think it's impossible? But in a way, when you use conditions, you already answered your question. What do you say? Possible, impossible? Or you don't know?
I don't know, sir.
But if you say it depends on the conditions, then do you see that there is a possibility here? If the conditions are right, then it would be possible.
Then we are more free to act. But if conditions is like too restricted,
Well, now you're into debate mode. But now I want you to think, reflect. So just take a little break, take a deep breath, and just consider my question. So you said it depends on the conditions, yeah? But if the conditions are right, you think it is possible to change yourself, or it's always impossible?
it is possible.
It is possible, yeah. Can you name such a condition which would make it possible?
Hmm. Like um, if I have a choice to do, like I haven't studied for my exam. Just I was ill or sick, and next day there's my exam. So there is two circumstances. Either I can cheat, or I can do of whatever I have in my mind. I can write about it. So there's like circumstance, but I have a choice. So I can choose rationally and act out with whatever my mind tells me to do.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so then you're able to escape this prison that you painted. So then you found a way out. Yeah.
But then again, if I'll think of my result, then I might be failed. So what if then? So it is good to what's good it does to me if I do not cheat and write it, but I will be failed because I will literally I don't know anything.
Wow. Can you synthesize this last idea? You lost me a little bit. What good is it to me if I what?
Like I was sick, I haven't studied. So there are two choices for me. Either I cheat or I do not cheat. But
Mm-hmm.
if I choose not to cheat, then my result, I might fail my exam. So then again, I have left with only one choice, to cheat if I don't want to fail it.
Mhm. But you're never left with one choice. You can cheat or you cannot cheat. You have two possibilities. And you always have to make a choice. Remember, that was what Sartre and de Beauvoir told us. That there is always a choice. You can do or you cannot do. Even if you think it's impossible, I have no choice. Yeah, you always have a choice. You can cheat, you cannot cheat, and then you take the consequences. And that is what makes you free. But if you believe that I have no choice, then you're in bad faith. Then you have decided that my life is determined. There is no way out. I have to do it like this. But then you have tricked yourself into believing that I'm not free. You have tricked yourself into believing that I cannot problematize my own, my own life. I cannot problematize my own value system because I cannot cheat. I'm a good student. I have to follow the rules. And then I will fail the test, etc., etc. And then what will happen? Yeah, you're painting a whole picture of what will happen when I do what I usually do. But you always have a choice. You can cheat, quit university, work at McDonald's. You know, lots of choices. You can always problematize your own ideas. It doesn't mean that the problematization leads to a fundamental change in your life or lead to something good. But you always have the possibility to problematize your ideas. You always have the possibility to do something else. At least, ideally, you have. You're okay with that idea?
Okay, sir.
Yeah? Okay?
Yeah, I will think about
Good.
it.
Okay, good. You want to add something? Are we good? Okay, fine.
We have Professor Rajivan who raised his hand. Professor Rajivan, you can ask your question, please. Thank you.
Good evening, all. And now let me try and make an attempt to problematize the issue of interpretation. That's specifically the betrayal in interpretation. So consider a case of counseling setup in which a client is telling that such and such person has got a jealousy towards me. Then I'm explaining that person, or I'm interpreting that feeling of jealousy as the projection of his or her own feeling towards the other. So who is betraying whom? Is it not the client is betraying himself or herself, and I am making it clear through interpretation? So that's what my doubt is.
Yeah. Well, I lost you a little bit. Can you reformulate your question?
Pardon me?
Yes, I lost you a little bit towards the
Okay,
end.
the thing is that
Can you just briefly reformulate?
I'll some more concretely, that if I'm a counselor and I'm counseling somebody else, and that person is telling that such and such person has got jealousy towards me, then that statement I am interpreting as the projection of the client's own mental state. So that's the defense mechanism projection. So that interpretation enables the client to get more insight into her own mind. So initially, the client was betraying herself unknowingly, unconsciously, which I made explicit through my interpretation. So in this case, interpretation is more truthful than the primary belief. So I'm just making an attempt to problematize the interpretation.
Yeah, okay. But do you think the client would agree with you? Or would the client feel betrayed?
Do not get you, sir.
Well, do you think the client would agree with you that your interpretation is more truthful? Or do you think the client could feel betrayed by your interpretation?
If I am successful, I can give insight into client's own mental state so that she's understanding that it's her own feeling that's being projected as the jealousy of other.
Yeah. And I will return to my question and see, do you think that the client might feel that your interpretation is a betrayal? or not.
Yes, if the insight is not sufficient, the client may feel.
Yeah. So then, as we said with Akshat, it's not definite whether it is a betrayal or not, or where the betrayal lies. But there is always a possibility that it is perceived as a betrayal. And then, of course, you can argue that, well, my interpretation is actually more truthful than your initial statement, because your initial statement was a bit cheeky to begin with. So I'm bringing out the truth here. But then if you want to be philosophical about it, you can say, well, you still changed something. So maybe the true nature of the statement was to be a bit untruthful. If you make the untruthful true, then are you betrayed? And so on. And so we can go on and go on and go on. But I think that the main point here is that when we change something, there is always potentiality that it's perceived as betraying the initial statement.
I agree with this. Because whenever there is an interpretation, there is a disparity between the statement and the interpretation. That's a necessity. I agree with that.
Again, can you repeat?
Whenever there is an interpretation, there is a disparity between the original statement and the interpretation.
Yes.
I agree with that point.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. So it's never exactly the same. So there's always the risk that it will be felt as a betrayal. So that's the main point. That people can feel betrayed. Then whether it's a betrayal for real or not, okay, maybe not so important. Okay.
Okay.
Good.
Thank you.
Now, if I may, I would like to go on to the actual exercise, the actual workshop, even if there might be more questions. So just make sure that we have time for it as well. We don't lose it, because I want to give a little presentation of what such a workshop that we often do. So I would like to share a link to a Google Doc in the chat. I hope that's okay, that you can use it, that you can open it. Just give me a second. Like this. And hopefully now you see 5 different statements. And the idea here is that you will now in this document write problematization questions to these statements. What you will do is that you write your name under a statement, underneath a statement, and then you write a question which you think will problematize, which will create some doubt in the author of the truthfulness. And yes, you're supposed to open the link here. So I will give you a few minutes just to write as many problematization questions as you can, and then we'll check them. So let me just see if this is clear to everyone. I have a question about the task. It seems clear, I think. Okay, so I'll give you a few minutes to write questions. And don't forget to put your name in front of the question as well.
a request to all the participants who have written down the questions. Please add your name next to the question. Thank you.
Matthias, I want to inform you that we intended to end the workshop around 9:15. Now, just an update. You're mute.
So we have 1 hour left.
No,
no?
half an hour.
Half an hour.
I don't.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, good. So I think we'll stop there now for the questions. And now I'll give you a couple of minutes just to read the questions in the document, the questions from the others, and try to look for questions which you think do not really problematize, and see if you can identify why are they not so good, you know? The questions you think, well, this question, it doesn't really shake the foundation here. It doesn't really do anything. And try to see why do you think this is not a very good problematization question. Let's see, Akshat, you raised your hand. You find one?
Yeah. Actually, my own question and Veena's question on statement number 3. It is bad to judge others.
Statement. Okay, so just a second. Which one do you want to start with? Veena's?
The first, yeah, Veena's. How do you
Veena's.
define bad? Bad for
Okay,
whom?
so you think that this does not really problematize the idea?
No, I think it tries to clarify, and it's more of a clarification question.
Okay. So how do you see that this is a clarification question rather than problematization?
Because it's asking the other person's clarification of what bad means, rather
Yeah.
than shaking the foundation.
Yes, indeed. Yes. It asks for a definition. Yeah. So let's check with Veena. Are you here? I see Veena. Are you with us? I just see your avatar. Okay, looks like she's not here. But yes, indeed. So I'll just write here a clarification question rather than problematization. Yes, because it asks for a definition, and the person will give a definition. How do you define bad? And she will define bad. Okay. But as you say, it didn't problematize anything. Yes, good. And then did you see the same problem? Any wrong question, or it's another problem?
I'm not too sure. I think it is also a clarification question, but I'm not too sure.
Yeah. Okay, so can you read your question?
Who decides what is bad?
Who decides what is bad? Yes. Well, I would call this a deepening question. Or sometimes we call them interview questions. We're just asking for some information. Yeah. So who decides bad? So then, yes, you could get an answer, Mr. X, whatever, who decides what is bad. But do you think this question could problematize? Do you think it at least has the possibility to problematize, or you think rather not?
Maybe somewhere, but I'm not able to point to how.
Yeah. But do you think there's a strong relation between the statement and the question? It is bad to judge others. Who decides what is bad? Do you think it goes to the core of the statement, or do you think it goes rather somewhere else?
I don't think it goes to the core. I think the judgment part is also part of the statement. So I don't think it addresses the whole uh, statement just
Yes,
justifiably. Yeah.
indeed. So even if we decided who decides what is bad, then even if we found this person, would it address the idea that it's bad to judge or not? Or it would be rather irrelevant.
Hmm. Yeah, I don't think this can qualify as a problematization question. Maybe if something is added to it.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. So it doesn't really, as we say, go to the core of the question. So right here misses the point of the question. Doesn't address. No, it is bad. Because here we have a moral issue. It is bad to judge. But asking who decides what is bad, it doesn't address this moral problem that it's bad to judge. It kind of misses the point a bit. No? Okay, anyone who wants to comment on this or these two questions that we dealt with, feel free to do so. Maybe you have another idea. Maybe you think that will actually work. Yamini, you have something?
I think it can become a problematization question.
The second one or the first one? Is it Venus or actions?
I think um, I would choose I would say both of them.
Okay,
If
let's deal
we-
with Venus first. You think this one could
Okay.
problematize? It is
Yes.
bad to judge others. How do you define bad? So explain. How can it problematize?
I think if we can ask her to think of either a particular example or something like that, something she can think of, uh, you know, that defines bad. So we can. It's basically to break the connection between badness and judgment. A question that can make her break the link between badness and judgment.
Yeah. But let's say that she comes up with a definition for bad, You know? For instance, can you think of a definition yourself, Yamini?
Of bad.
Yeah.
Something that is unpleasant or immoral.
Okay. Unpleasant or immoral.
Yes.
But then you could say it is unpleasant to judge others. Or is it is immoral to judge others?
Immoral.
But then it is immoral to judge others. Okay, but then did we shake the idea that it is bad to judge others? Or it still sounds like an idea, no? Because
Yeah.
I'm doing something unpleasant, doing something immoral, sounds rather bad.
Yes.
So I don't really see how defining bad could make it suddenly a good thing to judge others.
Yes.
Or how do you have an
Define.
idea how would it work?
Yes, I was thinking more of asking of a concrete situation where she have an example for her from her own life, like of badness. Not
Yeah.
looking for a method or what, but an example to concretely work on it.
But if she can give us such an example of a bad situation in her life, then what would be the connection to it being bad to judge others?
Because it can be heavy to consider something bad, and if it
Mhm.
removes that badness from judgment, um, it it can make her see a different perspective.
Wow. I'm not really following your idea here. But you're saying that we should try to find a situation which she defines as bad in her life?
Yes.
Yeah? And then what do you want us to do with this situation? Redefine it as not bad or something else?
I wanted to break the link between judgment and badness.
Yeah, I know. That's that's what we want to do. But do you think you would do it by working on such a situation? Asking her to find a bad situation which is heavy for her? I think what is missing here is the judgment. We're working with
Yes.
bad situation, but we're not
Yeah.
really dealing with the judgment. We're not really dealing with the link between bad and judgment. Do you agree?
Yes. Yes.
Yes. Because in order to break the link, we need to first see how these two are connected, and then try to disconnect them from each other.
Yes. Yeah, we
Yeah?
have to find both. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so your idea didn't really work. Okay. Okay.
I think we had another question from Gargi ma'am.
Okay. Go ahead.
I was thinking in term of when Yamini raised a question, it could be reformulated as or problematized. Uh, Maybe when we raise such a question, sometimes it is to understand what the other person is meaning by bad, so that one can come to the conclusion that it is bad to judge others.
Yeah. But
Because
by doing this, do you think we would be able to change the other person's mind?
no, not directly, because
No?
first we need to ask for reasons why is it bad to judge others.
Yeah.
That
Okay,
would
so
be
you're saying that this question could be the starting point. of a line of questioning where we could eventually have.
It could be a part, if not the starting point, but it could be a, because sometimes there is not a clarity on what sometimes words mean for different people, and sometimes the words are used in a different way, because sometimes I have heard people say that this is not good manners, whereas that issue is concerned with not with etiquette, it is rather a different issue.
Yeah.
So to understand the person whom we are dealing with, one would to some extent later on require what they mean by that.
Yes. Yes, indeed, I agree with you. For instance, if this was a consultation and
Right.
someone comes with this question to the philosopher, or this idea, it is bad to judge others. Yes, indeed, this could be a first question. How do you define bad, or what is bad to you? To start to try to understand the person in order to make it easier for us to then challenge the idea that it's bad to judge others. Yes, it could be the starting point of a line of questioning. But for now, we're trying to find one question that problematize the idea.
So
And you
that
think,
would be a straightforward why question.
yeah, so you see, this question alone wouldn't really problematize the idea.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay, good. All right, so let's take another one. If someone has found a question here which they think is not so good, then we can check it so we can see what the problem is. Or even if you have found a question which you think is really good, we can check it as well and see why you think it's good. Yeah. Let's see. Okay, we have two people. Okay, Gaiji-chan, you raised your hand. You found one? Your mic, please.
In the first question, Tulika's question, what about dysfunctional emotional abilities of parents? Question number 2, sorry.
Question number 2.
If one also, 1 and 2, what if one has been fond of self-destructive? It doesn't, I think,
Okay,
go
okay,
down.
just a second, just a second. Let's take it slowly.
Okay.
So we have statement number 2, right?
Right.
Tulika's question. So the statement is one should love their parents unconditionally. And then can you read Tulika's question?
What about the dysfunctional emotional abilities of parents? Does it let us love them unconditionally even after we are aware of the dark truths about them?
Right. So you see a problem with this question.
Right. It's
So,
quite a
tell us.
loaded question.
Can you repeat?
It's quite a loaded question because it has taken into account many factors.
Okay.
And
you think that's a problem?
that could be problematic because if it is being taken in a counseling situation.
Yeah. But if
Then after.
But if we look away from the counseling situation, just look at it as a problematization question. The fact that it's loaded, do you think that's a problem?
Yes, it is. It is taking into account a lot, and it is also being judgmental in the last part.
But
dark truth about them.
But do you think a loaded and judgmental question can problematize an idea? Or it cannot?
I don't know because we have come to conclusions and not with sound reasons or argumentations. So if we want to the statement that we should love our parents unconditionally, the problematization taking into account there are certain facts.
Let's deal with this issue first. Do you want to go on to something else? But if we go back to my question, do you think a loaded and judgmental question can problematize an idea? Or no, it cannot?
I don't think so. It might be.
You don't think so? And why not?
Because what I feel is that we have presumed something first.
Yeah.
And then we have also come to a conclusion. Especially the word dark truths. So it would
But
show a lot.
a presumption, can a presumption, even if it is dark, do you think a presumption can change the mind in someone else? If I say, for instance, you say, I love my parents unconditionally, and I say, well, presume that your parents are serial killers. It's a presumption, it's rather dark. But then, based on this presumption, is it right to love them unconditionally? No.
If you take a concrete example, it might waver, but somewhere.
Okay, that's good enough. If we take a concrete example, that might work. Yeah? So it's a presumption. I'm painting a picture. Yeah? It's quite heavy, it's quite loaded. But this might be able to problematize the idea. You okay with that?
Sort of.
Sort of, okay. Yeah. But I take it you're a rather moral person yourself. Am I right?
I try to.
Yeah, I try to, but would you say that you are or rather moral or rather not?
No, I try to do what is right.
Yeah.
And
but you know, you can be immoral and try to be moral.
It can be possible.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, but yeah, at least you have a moral straight in you. You want to be moral. So you don't want to judge other people.
I try to avoid because there's always another side to look into.
Yeah, you don't want to judge other people, and that's clear from what you said, that you find this question judgmental. So for you, it's a problem to judge other people. Is that correct?
That's correct, because our judgments are based on only the aspect that we see or are aware of.
Yeah. But then it would make it rather difficult for you to problematize this idea that it's bad to judge, right? Because you believe yourself that it is bad to judge. But then for you, it will be rather difficult to problematize it.
Because I want everyone to agree with this.
Yeah, indeed. So of course it will be difficult for you to problematize.
But then there would be an argumentation for it. It won't be a debate.
Yeah, indeed. So that's what we need to do. To distance ourselves from our own ideas and try to create arguments for it. And even if we believe that it's bad to judge, yeah, we need to try to find an argument
we have to
for a situation where it is not bad to judge. It doesn't mean that we have to completely eradicate the idea, but at least maybe we can find a context where judgment is okay. And do you think, can you find it?
Yes, I do.
Can you find it? Yeah. In which context can it be okay to judge someone?
What I have experienced is generally in more discussions in ethics, where we are talking of subjectivism, etc. So the very argument that the subjectivists give, that it is wrong to judge others, and then they themselves make that judgment. So we have to come up with examples where we say it is.
Okay, but do you have such an example? Do you have a context where judging others is okay?
If the context is on way people dress.
Again, can you repeat?
The way people dress.
Oh, so it's okay to judge the way people dress?
No. When it's not okay to judge. I mean, when people then that would be a wrong example.
But now we're looking for a context where it is
But
right.
in moral issues, it will not be a judgment about a person. It would be more about the act.
Yeah.
Like
But,
cheating is wrong.
yeah.
So
Judging.
if someone cheats, then that act which is done is wrong.
All right. So then it would be a reasonable judgment to say that this act is wrong.
But we can't classify
case,
the person as a cheat. That would be being hasty in our judgment.
So that judgment would be a reasonable one. That judgment would be okay. Yes. Okay, fine. So that's what we need. We need to find a context where it's okay to judge someone. We can find maybe on the football field we have a referee who judges the players. Or in a court of law we have a judge who judge people. And if we say categorically it's bad to judge, we need to get rid of referees, we need to get rid of courts of law.
That would be a fallacy.
Then okay. So then we could use this context to try to break the foundation of this idea that it's bad to judge. But am I right, Yamini, that we need to stop soon?
Yes, we have 3-4 minutes left.
Yeah.
If you want to take 1 or 2 more questions.
Yes. Well, this was quite a short presentation, a workshop, but it's basically the structure that we often base them on a competency, like problematization. We have to work with Google Docs. And then we invite people to do some work, we invite people to write, and we invite people to think. And then we also invite people to reflect on the others' thinking, to read what the others have wrote and try to find problems with it and try to, define those problems, try to vocalize those problems. And then we work with it and we see if it makes sense. So it's all an exercise in thinking using our minds. So, yes, let's just see if I don't know, maybe we need to stop now, or if we have time, if someone would like a last comment before we finish.
Yes, let's start. Shivani ma'am, can we take a comment or question, or should we stop here?
If there is any, I mean, we will love to have any comment.
It's okay. So if anybody has the last comment or something to say, please raise your hand.
And we
Step
request
forward.
our participants to fill in the form, the feedback form, so that we may evolve ourselves. It will help us.
So if there's, let's continue, ma'am.
Yeah. So thank you, Matthias. There are few questions which now I think cannot be addressed, but I hope that Yamini discuss and she shares these questions with you on your mail. And it was a wonderful exercise for us also, because we are not trained practitioners, and we think on a different track. And I think the kind of blueprint that you have shared with us, I think it is workable once we try and explore the domain that you are offering us to understand. I think you started with problematization, and under problematization you introduced us to the concept of questioning and re-questioning, and of course argumentation. And you also although this was one of the query that came up in my mind, that you said that questioning demands listening. Now what kind of listening? Re-questioning is permitted. Now that also gets bifurcated into debate and discussion. So what are the criteria for deciding that this is debate and this is discussion? How do we reach a unanimous conclusion? I think this is again a problematic effect of that gets generated during any workshop or talk. And of course, your the underlining point that I can again, that what we all try to do is to take away the messages from these concrete workshops, is that the idea is not you. Idea and you, it's just the same, it's a similar shade that I can derive, that Oscar was mentioning about, that idea is not important, the person is important, the soul is important, or I mean the shade is very vibrant. So uh, I would say that it is again one of the follow-ups. It's a reassurance of the same idea. And of course, when you are talking of conceptualization, I found a little bit of contradiction, that when we define that, defining itself is, it makes you static in philosophical endeavor. And then when we say that conceptualization means giving it a name and a form, then we are practically defining a thing. We are putting a halt, and at the same time, we want to save ourselves by not committing this blunder that we endorse definitions, right? So conceptualization, are we thinking conceptualization in terms of definitions or not? I'm sure the words are different, the meaning has to be different for both. But this was one of my queries. And again, interpretation, of course, that was another interesting point that you are leaving us with. And of course, true interpretations are always probable. This really makes sense. I would really cherish this idea. And of course, another one which is more significant for me personally, that no proposition is absolute. But with this, I think as a student of philosophy, we are forced to think, if nothing is absolute, then why do we have this word at all? Why do we, I mean, what about metaphysical truths that we try to address, and we try to ponder over these ideal truths or metaphysical truths? So I think, and conditioning, and of course the concept of will that you have interpreted for us, I think these are very significant foundations that we, as students and teachers of philosophy, must try to understand and interpret for our own selves, for our own personal evolution. So I wish to extend a very warm note of gratitude towards Matthias for taking out time and sharing his expertise with us, and of course, sharing his experience and letting us know how this philosophical practice takes place actually while addressing and formulating questions and answering them. And I know many of
Yes,
us were
thank you.
simply explanations. So we missed the points at many fronts while addressing to the questions. So once again, I extend a very heartfelt note of gratitude towards you. Thank you. And I also thank our students for being here, and all other participants, those who could take out their precious time for uh, being with us, I would say. So, looking forward, it's just a start. I hope that we meet again. So, over to Akshat.
Yes. Thank you all. We would request you to please fill the feedback form. We would like to have more workshops, more practically oriented workshops, less of theory. That's the idea behind SAMVAD. And we will soon have our next workshop also. We will let you know by email. If you have any clarifications, if you want to work with us, if you want to contribute, if you want some information, if you want to connect with some of the speakers here, you can always write to me or Yamini. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, Matthias. It was a pleasure having you here. Yamini, would you like to have some?
Yes, I would like to share 2-3 points. Since we are starting a series of workshops and special lectures, I would also like to inform Matthias that unknowingly you sparked a lot of Indian debates. And if you have seen the chat box, you would have realized that you unknowingly did that. And that is actually that I find very nice, because this is a kind of cultural difference, or you can say that analytic the practice, what practice is doing, and what Indian debates, Indian metaphysics is somehow Indian analytics is also different. But the presentation or the demonstration sparked a lot of it. I think our host sir also had a lot of concepts and ideas which he put in the chat box, and it would be a very interesting debate if we someday if we open up those kind of ideas and see how they come into practice. And that was one of the things that I wanted to say, that um, one of the intention to have a blended way of working on many perspectives, that are Indian concerns, Western concerns, and it somehow initiated, even though we didn't pick up, but it has been already initiated in the minds. Secondly, I would say that if there are any questions, or if there are any queries, you can mail it to Akshat, me, or on IPP's website. Third, I would like to thank everyone. And if you notice that, what I noticed, that Matthias used a lot of silence during his workshop, and the silence actually changed the nature of questions and answers, and that was a very important tool that we usually don't use. So yeah, I would like to thank Matthias. I would like to thank Shivani ma'am for giving me this opportunity, and I would like to thank Akshat for helping and doing everything. And so thank you, ma'am. Yeah, so we can, yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Professor
Akshat.
Shivani. Thank you, Matthias. Thanks, Akshat and Yamini. Nice meeting all
Thank
of
you,
you.
Gargi ji.